Thank you, everyone. It's really lovely to see you all and to have a chance to share some Dharma. I'm feeling a little queasy at the moment, so anyway, I don't think it'll make too much difference. What I wanted to talk to you about today was well, first of all, to start off with, just mentioning what's called the perfections, and then going through a sutta from the Pali Canon, which leads into some nice koans. I wanted to mention the perfections because I think even just going through them and mentioning them can be very powerful, because they are such wonderful suggestions and help encourage us on the path and help us to see the fruits of a deep practice, what they look like, what that looks like. So the reason I wanted to go from mentioning the perfections to a little from the Pali Canon is that I wanted to share with you a couple of suttas which I think really show in quite magnificently how these qualities were manifested by the Buddha himself. I think they give a really strong sense of him, of what he was really like, that you can really see him in these suttas. I'm not sure that's always the case in the Pali Canon. I don't necessarily feel what the man was like from them. So I wanted to mention these couple of ones that I find very moving, because I think that they contain a strong sense of the man. You've probably heard of the perfections. These are 6 characteristics of awakening, and themselves represent a beautiful picture of what awakening looks like. The first of the perfections is generosity. This generosity is deeply imbued with the heart, with the sense of loving kindness that comes with awakening. So the first is generosity. So that contains enormous warmth. This generosity is an enormous warmth. The second is ethics. I like this. I especially like this because it's very much focused on, as much as possible, being someone who doesn't cause harm. And in this way, it's a focus on being someone that others deeply trust, can have a deep trust in, and feel safe with that person, because they know that person just has no capacity, if you like, for deliberate harm. So there's generosity, ethics, and the third is patience. So this has the lovely sense of giving others the time to realize, in a sense, to realize things for themselves, to not have our ideas of how they should be shoved down their throat, and a patience with ourselves. that we can overcome whatever it is we wish to overcome. And this leads into perseverance or effort, which is the fourth. So we have generosity, ethics, patience, effort, concentration, and wisdom. So these are the 6 perfections of Mahayana Buddhism. And we can deeply feel the sense of vow that these contain. The loveliness of being someone who can embody these, who's directing themselves towards embodying these. So in the Pali Canon, there's a couple of suttas which talk about right speech. And we know that in our dealings in life, so much comes down to how we use words and interact. So our speech is our literal speech, but it's also how we behave, and it's a speech inside our own heads as much as it is what is spoken out loud to others. This is really magnificent sutta, and I'll read it through twice. So please just relax completely and let this soak in. This is Sutta 58 from the Middle Length Discourses of the Buddha. If you've seen these big volumes of Buddha's discourses, and this sutta paints a picture of the right speech of the Buddha. It's not saying do this. It's not something the Buddha did deliberately. It's a description of the behavior of someone who has realized a very deep practice. Okay, so that's how we look at it, not as something to beat ourselves up, but more a pointer to what that looks like. And this is the Tathagata, the Buddha, speaking to someone called Prince Abhaya. And it's part of a longer sutta. And the Buddha says, "So too, Prince, such speech as the Tathagata knows to be untrue, incorrect and unbeneficial, and which is also unwelcome and disagreeable to others, such speech the Tathagata does not utter. Such speech as the Tathagata knows to be true and correct, but unbeneficial, and which is also unwelcome and disagreeable to others, such speech the Tathagata does not utter. Such speech as the Tathagata knows to be true, correct, and beneficial, but which is unwelcome and disagreeable to others, the Tathagata knows the time to use such speech. Such speech as the Tathagata knows to be untrue, incorrect, and unbeneficial, but which is welcome and agreeable to others, such speech the Tathagata does not utter. Such speech as the Tathagata knows to be true and correct but unbeneficial, and which is welcome and agreeable to others, such speech the Tathagata does not utter. Such speech as the Tathagata knows to be true, correct, and beneficial, and which is welcome and agreeable to others, the Tathagata knows the time to use such speech. Why is that? Because the Tathagata has compassion for beings. There's really quite a lot to process in this. So please, once again, I ask you just to relax, and we'll go through it one more time so you can pick up a little more of it. I wouldn't expect anyone to absorb all the nuances of this the first time they hear it. So too, Prince, such speech as the Tathagata knows to be untrue, incorrect, and unbeneficial, and which is also unwelcome and disagreeable to others, such speech the Tathagata does not utter. Such speech as the Tathagata knows to be true and correct, but unbeneficial, and which is also unwelcome and disagreeable to others, such speech the Tathagata does not utter. Such speech as the Tathagata knows to be true, correct, and beneficial, but which is unwelcome and disagreeable to others, the Tathagata knows the time to use such speech. Such speech as the Tathagata knows to be untrue, incorrect, and unbeneficial, but which is welcome and agreeable to others, such speech the Tathagata does not utter. Such speech as the Tathagata knows to be true and correct but unbeneficial, and which is welcome and agreeable to others, such speech the Tathagata does not utter. Such speech as the Tathagata knows to be true, correct, and beneficial, and which is welcome and agreeable to others, the Tathagata knows the time to use such speech. Why is that? Because the Tathagata has compassion for beings. So what we notice here is someone whose words we would always actually be able to trust, because if the words are untrue, incorrect, and unbeneficial, or any thereof, the Tathagata doesn't use those words. He will use words that are true, correct, and beneficial, even if, whether they're welcome or not, as appropriate to the circumstance. It says he knows the time when to utter those words. So this is a person whose words we can trust, who uses words with enormous care. And moreover, he's not deliberately looking at everything he says to make this happen. It's happening because of his practice. It's a fruit of his practice that comes from someone, the Tathagata, who has limitless compassion. So this, he himself embodies what that is. And I think it's from this that we begin to see the power of him as a teacher, that he literally embodies the perfections. I'll just briefly mention a little more from here. This is a lot easier to process what I'm going to say now. I apologize if that was a little hard to take in. I think this next one gives a beautiful sense of him and the warmth and his warmth. It's also right speech. And this is from Sutta, it's called the Brahmins of Sala, which is Sutta 41 from the Middle Length Discourses. And how, householders, are there 4 kinds of verbal conduct in accordance with the Dharma? Righteous conduct. And I will skip some bits of it. Here, someone abandoning false speech abstains from false speech. And now it goes through some different circumstances, but it basically means when he's summoned to speak. And then it goes on. He does not, in full awareness, speak falsehood for his own ends, or for another's ends, or for some trifling worldly end. Abandoning malicious speech, he abstains from malicious speech. He does not repeat elsewhere that which he has heard here, in order to divide those people from these. Nor does he repeat to these people what he has heard elsewhere, in order to divide these people from those. Thus, he is one who reunites those who are divided, a promoter of friendships, who enjoys concord, rejoices in concord, delights in concord, a speaker of words that promote concord. It goes on. Abandoning harsh speech, he abstains from harsh speech. He speaks words as are gentle, pleasing to the ear and lovable, as go to the heart, are courteous, desired by many and agreeable to many. Abandoning gossip, he abstains from gossip. He speaks at the right time, speaks what is fact, speaks on what is good. And skipping a little, he speaks words that are worth recording, reasonable, moderate, and beneficial. This is how there are 4 kinds of verbal conduct in accordance with the Dharma. I find this quite lovely because it's unusual to hear him spoken of, to hear the Buddha spoken of so warmly in the Pali Canon. And these words written here in this sutta really give us a genuine sense of this person. And it's good to remember, to really reflect on, not just him as a teacher saying various things, but rather what he literally embodied for people. And it was that made him a powerful teacher. It wasn't because he said the right things to people. You should do this, you should do that, you should do right speech, this is how you do right speech. No. He's literally describing himself for us, and we can see that. And those people who were there at that time saw and felt that and were deeply moved by that. I wanted to move on from there and turn to how we reflect on speech, often in our koan studies. This is very, very interesting. And it gives us an understanding of the power of language and the power of silence as well. We've all seen these koans that ask us to look carefully at speech and how teaching the Dharma relates to speech. Now we can see in these words that we get a deep sense of something that's beyond the words themselves. In this case, the very character of awakening itself can come through those words, rather than some literal understanding of them as a bunch of rules to follow. So when we speak of, in Zen, of a realization that's not dependent on letters, words, phrases, we can begin to get a sense and a feel for that. And we have many koans to help us understand what can be conveyed in a non-literal sense with language or without language. You might remember those who do the koan class, and others, familiar with the koans, might remember this juicy trifecta of koans that we looked at from the Blue Cliff record. So just wanted to remind you of these because, Zen is nothing if not hilarious and quirky, right? So this is from the Blue Cliff record, and I just want to say I love the Blue Cliff record. I'll just throw that in. There's so much that's good in here. And it's so challenging as well, this collection. This is the 70th case. It's called Kei Shan Attends on Pai Chang. And this is the case. Kei Shan, Wu Feng, and Yun Yen were together attending on Pai Chang. Pai Chang asked Kei Shan, "With your throat, mouth, and lips shut, how will you speak?" Kei Shan said, "Please, teacher, you speak instead." Chang said, "I don't refuse to speak to you, but I fear that if I did, in the future, I would be bereft of descendants." So we hear this question repeated in 3 successive koans. So this is really a good thing to have a look at. And the question is, with your throat, mouth, and lips shut, how will you speak? And I think this is very interesting because I know for me when I first read it, and still now, it creates this kind of discomfort. And that's what koans do, right? There's like this physical sense of, wait, but what? And so there's this construction in the mind that goes on, right? Where we have an idea, and then we're attached to that idea. Lips, mouth, what does it say? Throat, mouth, and lips shut. How will you speak? So what we see then is how words directly affect what seems possible, even though what's possible isn't dependent on words. But we feel it, right? We feel physically this barrier, and it's uncomfortable, this barrier set up by this and the next two koans as well. And so when actually we practice with these koans, we sit with that discomfort and we allow ourselves to experience this discomfort and relax into it and trust it. And as we begin to be able to trust the discomfort of koans, that is when they can do their work on us. And then we study these koans that seem to be about odd things or whatever, and then we realize that we are being transformed in really useful ways, not just in the exact thing that the koan seems to be talking about. This seeing through koans like this, helping us not to be attached to words, not to chase the meaning of words, not to rely on grasping at words. What are those words? And having them define all sorts of things, to define reality for us. So what happens when we can have a greater softness around these words? And this is where we begin to have a sense of what I've heard Nettie describe as flavorlessness of words. Then we can see words for what they are, that they have meanings, of course. But if we try to grasp at them, we suffer and we narrow our focus. And we imagine, I'm here seeking something in some words. And this is why so often in the koans you get the message that, the teacher doesn't want to speak. Because if they do, they just make it murky for us by speaking. They make seeing the Dharma murky because then we're attached to those words. Our focus is narrowed to those words, and there's a sense of lack and seeking something which perhaps describes the experience of another, but we've forgotten our own experience. We've forgotten that the Dharma is always, always about our own experience. So can we come back to our own experience? Still hear words and silence and not be attached to those. Now I just want to flick to one more koan, which is the last one I'll flick to. And this is a very cheeky koan. I love it. In a very cheeky collection. It's called The Record of Empty Hall. And it was compiled by someone called Zhu Tang. And after each koan, he kind of adds a very cheeky comment. Oh, this is nice. So I want to mention this koan and mention something. Dosho Port translated this and wrote commentaries on each one. So I want to mention what he brings into this. So this is case 3 in the Record of Empty Hall. So again, I just ask you to relax with all of this. Just relax. Because we can talk about this endlessly, like anytime you want to talk about it, we can talk about it, talk more about it. This is case 3. And it's called The World Honored One Finally Pays Attention. And the World Honored One is the Buddha. So we're back again talking about the Buddha. Okay? And it says, and it's called He Finally Pays Attention. So we can already get a sense of the cheeky tenor of this koan collection. It's like paying out on the Buddha. When the World Honored One was about to enter nirvana, Manjushri asked him to turn the Dharma wheel once more. The World Honored One said, "Goodness, I have lived in this world for 49 years and haven't ever spoken a word. You ask me to turn the Dharma wheel again? Have I ever turned the Dharma wheel?" And then after that we get a little interjection from Zhu Tang, who does this with all the koans in the collection. He adds a slightly interesting one-liner at the end of all of them. And this is it. It says, on behalf of Manjushri, Zhu Tang said, "Finally, the World Honored One is paying attention." So I'll just read this one more time. I can see we're running out of time and we haven't had any time at all for discussion. So I'll just read this and then maybe and say very little, and then we better stop. When the World Honored One was about to enter nirvana, Manjushri asked him to turn the Dharma wheel once again. The World Honored One said, "Goodness, I've lived in this world for 49 years and haven't ever spoken a word. You ask me to turn the Dharma wheel again? Have I ever turned the Dharma wheel?" On behalf of Manjushri, Zhu Tang said, "Finally, the World Honored One is paying attention." So, you might know that to turn the Dharma wheel means to teach the Dharma. It's very interesting that the Buddha says, I've been alive for 49 years, and then he's about to die. Of course, he lived until he was 80, so that's an interesting comment in and of itself, and is suggestive of the fact that his awakening for him was a birth, was becoming Buddha, which was more like a birth. So he says he's been alive for 49 years. So that's interesting in and of itself. So, this is what Dosho Port says. Fundamentally, what is the difference between words and silence? What is the difference between acting in confusion and turning the Dharma wheel? This is a really important point. What is turning the Dharma wheel? So, because it implies, if we think there's turning the Dharma wheel and not turning the Dharma wheel, it implies that the Dharma isn't already here, that we're not already living fully immersed in the Dharma, in the completely unavoidable and unescapable Dharma, which is always right in front of our face. So the turning of the Dharma wheel is constant. Everything we do is turning the Dharma wheel. It's always, always present for you. It's always right there with you. It's not somewhere else. And this is a really vital point. And a bit later he says, when the glaciers carve and we realize the words in silence, the silence in the words, then turning the Dharma wheel and not turning the Dharma wheel are dreams from another life. All right, well, I will have to leave it there because we've run out of time. So I'll stop and then just invite any questions. Okay, thank you so much. Stopping now.